Welcome back in. Today we're discussing our Week 16 must-add waiver wire targets for this week. It was another pretty brutal day for injuries. A lot more than we've actually had, I think, in a while. At least in terms of like fantasy relevant guys that we're going to definitely need to talk about. So let's just go ahead and get to it. We're going to start with the quarterback position. So if you're needing to stream, especially with somebody like Patrick Mahomes, who went down with a torn ACL today. You know, you're definitely going to be looking for a waiver ad if you made it to the next round. So let's go ahead and get to it. And we're going to start with one. I mean, obviously, if Trevor Lawrence is out there, you're adding him. He's the best option. He has been on fire the last month of the season. Just put out 50 fantasy points today. He's absolutely crushed, but he's also rostered like 63% of leagues. So I didn't want to get too far into it because I think in a lot of leagues, especially your most competitive ones, he's probably been added because of how well he's been playing. But if he's sitting out there, he's easily the best waiver ad for this week. Let's keep it moving and move over to the next quarterback, and that is going to be CJ Stroud. Now, Stroud completed 22 of 29 passes for 260 yards and 3 touchdowns for 23 fantasy points against the Cardinals. Stroud was on this list last week, and his run of strong home performances continued in Week 15. And he will look to keep that going again this week against a very vulnerable Raiders pass defense. Stroud at home this season is averaging nearly 20 fantasy points per game, and with a lack of a rushing attack, or at least a consistent one, we see the Texans rank inside the top 10 in passer rate over expectation, as well as top 5 in pace of play. Stroud should be viewed as a low-end QB1 or a high-end QB2 this week. Let's keep moving here. Let's move over to Tyler Shook. Only rostered 9% of leagues, but Shook may not have a huge ceiling on a week-to-week basis, but he's displayed a strong floor recently. Today against the Panthers, the rookie quarterback completed 24 of 32 for 272 yards and a touchdown. He also rushed 8 times for 32 yards. Shook has now totaled 30 or more rushing yards in back-to-back games and has 6 carries or more in 4 straight, which raises his weekly floor. Next up is a really good matchup against the Jets. And then lastly, J.J. McCarthy versus the Giants, rostered in 35% of leagues. J.J. McCarthy is experiencing quite the turnaround the last few weeks. Tonight against the Cowboys, McCarthy completed 15 of 24 passes for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed 4 times for another score for 24 fantasy points. On one hand, it was against the Cowboys, who have been blasted by opposing quarterbacks all year. But on the other hand, with how bad he looked previously, McCarthy is starting to stack positive starts and now gets to finish the season with great matchups against the Giants and Lions. McCarthy should be viewed as a high-end QB2 in Week 16. Now, lastly, a couple other guys that I have on here, like Tua Tagovailoa. He gets an incredible matchup this week against the Bengals next week, but the Bengals allow this while the Bengals allow the second most fantasy points at quarterback. I do think, despite the matchups, you'd have to be pretty desperate to get here, as Tua has only scored 10 or more fantasy points once since Week 8. And then Kirk Cousins had a flashback game against the Bucs on Thursday. Cousins passed for 373 yards and 3 touchdowns for 26 fantasy points against the Bucs. Next up for the Falcons as they head to Arizona and get another great matchup against the Cardinals. Again, this would likely be a desperation play at this point of the year. Let's keep moving here, and let's move over to, I think, is going to be the most important position to talk about this week, and that is going to be the running back position, because there's a lot to talk about here, because we saw quite a few injuries today at that position. Now, not all of them are going to probably equal to some of these guys being relevant. I think the first one to talk about, though, is Ja'Cory Merritt. He is rostered in 48% of leagues. I figured it'd be higher than that, especially since the news came out that Chris Rodriguez was going to miss about an hour and a half before kickoff. But either way, that allowed the preseason hype machine, Ja'Cory Merritt, to insert himself back into the lead back convo. He finished with 18 carries for 96 yards and a score for 15.6 fantasy points. Next up for JCM and the Commanders is a Saturday matchup against the Eagles. If for whatever reason Chris Rodriguez misses and JCM is still sitting out there on your waiver wire, he deserves an ad with that Eagles and Cowboys remaining on their schedule. Now, I will mention with him, I think the tough part, if he was still sitting out there compared to some of these other options, is I don't know what this is going to look like with Chris Rodriguez returns again, in Week 16. Does this go back to being a 3-way committee? I don't know. I will say it was an encouraging start, even though it was it gets a pretty awesome matchup, but still it was a very encouraging start for the rookie running back. So I do think that he is intriguing and somebody that does get a good matchup, especially if Jalen Carter were to miss again for the Eagles. So keep moving here. Let's move over to Jawar Jordan, a roster in only 1% of leagues. Now, this is somebody that's going to be widely available. And Nick Chubb was inactive with a rib injury, which opened the door for Woody Marks to assume a workhorse role. But Marks ended up exiting in the first quarter with an ankle injury. It did not return. This thrusted Jordan into a huge workload, and he took it and ran with it. He finished with 15 carries for 101 yards and 2 catches for 17 yards for nearly 14 PPR points. The more positive part is he handled 78% of the backfield carries and received an 8% target share. Impressive day for the 2024 sixth round pick out of Louisville. This will be a situation we'll need to monitor this week. If both Chubb and Mark misses week 16, Jordan will be in line for a huge role and a good matchup against a Raiders defense that allows the 10th most PPR points to running backs. I do think Dare Ogunbowale, if this game were somehow close between them and the Raiders, I think he would probably factor in as probably the pass catching back a little bit more. But either way, really impressive game here for Jordan, especially one where this team has really lacked really consistent running back upside. So if Woody Marks misses, I think he's the more key one here than Nick Chubb. But if Jordan misses, I do think that Jordan would make a lot of sense here if Marks were to miss in week 16. So next up is going to be Michael Carter. Michael Carter carried the ball 14 times for 56 yards. He also caught all 4 of his targets for an additional 38 yards for 13 PPR points. Carter received such a large workload due to Bam Knight getting carted off the field with an ankle injury. He ended up receiving 78% of the backfield rushes and a healthy 10% target share. That's the highest mark for a Cardinals running back since week 2. Carter has now racked up 525 total yards and 5 touchdowns this year. The Cardinals' backfield has dealt with injuries all year. And if Knight likely misses week 16, Carter should receive another healthy workload at home against the Falcons. And if he misses extended time, he would also get a matchup against the Bengals in week 17. And if you remember last year, this is the very situation that Carter found himself in to close out the year last year because all the injuries to the running back room. So Michael Carter only rostered in 5% of leagues. It's funny because there was a time this year where he was a hot waiver ad and then it ended up being other players that overtook him. But I think we're back here for another Michael Carter situation against the Falcons. And then lastly, Audric Estime only rostered in 1% of leagues. Devin Neal left with a hamstring injury after he scored a touchdown and did not return. Estime didn't do a ton, but he handled 3 carries for 11 yards, but he caught all 3 passes for 39 yards. Evan Hull was the other running back who received touches. He finished with 4 carries for 12 yards and wasn't targeted at all. If Neal and Kamara miss week 16, I would guess Estime handles the bulk of the touches with Evan Hull mixing in. The Saints do get an incredible matchup against the Jets, who have been thrashed on the ground opposing running backs and allowing the 3rd most PPR points to running back. So definitely a situation we're going to have to monitor. I tried to find any information I could about, post game, if they were going to talk about Devin Neal, but they didn't really give anything. So we'll have to wait and see on that because it was really a shame because Devin Neal's been playing really well. But if Devin Neal misses week 16, then I think Audric Estime at least probably becomes some sort of a flex play against the Jets. So, and then lastly, if Blake Corum or Tyler Algier are available, that should change. They should. Blake Corum still says he's only rostered in 40% of Yahoo leagues. I don't get it, but again, very much involved in this offense. So either way, let's move over to the wide receiver position, and we are going to hit on a few guys over here. First up is going to be Luther Burden, only rostered in 17% of leagues. We had quite a curveball get thrown at us on Sunday with Roma Dunze getting ruled inactive with about 5 minutes before lock this morning. Burden was the clear wide receiver 1, catching 6 of 7 targets for 84 yards before leaving with an ankle injury. Now, it's possible that it's not that serious, and with the Bears having the game well in hand against the Browns at that point, but it's certainly something we're going to have to monitor this week because I don't think Roma Dunze, who re-aggravated his injury, is going to play, especially with the short turnaround with a game on Saturday night against the Packers. So as long as Burden can play, I think he's a pretty strong wide receiver 3 play this in week 16. Now, next up is going to be Jaden Reed. In Reed's second game back from a broken collarbone, he finished with 11 PPR points on 5 catches for 55 yards. Christian Watson ended up leaving that game and ended up being taken to the hospital with a chest injury. Really a shame because Christian Watson was playing really well. It seems unlikely that he plays this weekend, which should allow Reed to be a primary target for Jordan Love. It is a very much a consideration as a flex play against the Bears, who allow the 3rd most PPR points to wide receivers. Next up is going to be Adonai Mitchell, rostered only 29% of leagues. A.D. Mitchell caught 6 of 9 for 58 yards and a score for 17 PPR points. He's now been targeted 40 times over his last 5 starts. While I would prefer Tyrod Taylor at quarterback, garbage time opportunity should be there with this type of usage, and it'll keep him in flex consideration moving forward. And then lastly, Jalen Coker. Coker caught all four of his targets for 60 yards and a touchdown for 14 PPR points against the Saints. He's now racked up 11 or more PPR points in three of his last four starts, but he's being utilized as a downfield threat and has only received 18 targets over that span. I think Coker is more of a boomer bust flex option in a must-win home matchup against the Bucks. Now, in deeper formats, I think a couple players we can talk about. First, Darius Slayton. He's continually being involved in the offense, downfield threat here. But I think he's somebody you can always look at in a pinch in a flex option. But I would probably be a little bit more desperate to get to him, mainly because we are in the fantasy playoffs now, a week away from the fantasy championship. So I don't know if I'd want to hang my hat on that, but he definitely could be somebody you could look at. I think a couple other guys, David Sills, I think in deeper formats, I think you'd have to be pretty desperate to play him, but he especially when he only has 27 career receptions. However, I think in much deeper leagues, Sills is worth a look after receiving 10 targets against the Bucks. He turned those 10 targets and 6 catches for 78 yards. I doubt Drake London suits up and Darnell Mooney continues to struggle. So Sills could be a play against a bad Cardinals defense at week 16. And then lastly, I just want to mention with Christian Watson out, Matthew Golden led the team with a 20% target share, and he finished with 3 catches, 50 yards. He pretty much steps right into that Christian Watson role, being more of the downfield threat. But again, with Christian Watson out, I think you could look at Matthew Golden in this matchup against the Bears. Let's keep moving here and move over to the last one, and it's going to be the tight end position. And again, I think some really strong options to look at here. First is going to be Darren Waller. As long as Waller makes it through Monday Night Football matchup against the Steelers, he should be in line as a strong play against the Bengals, who have been historically bad against the tight end position. If you're in need of a tight end in Week 16 on fantasy playoffs, Waller will likely be a low end tight end 1 or a high end tight end 2. Next up is going to be Colby Parkinson. And I think might be the most intriguing option of all the players that are listed because Parkinson today caught 5 of 7 targets for 75 yards and 2 scores for 24 PPR points against the Lions. Parkinson has now scored a touchdown in 5 of his last 6 games, and he has scored 11 or more PPR points in 4 of 6. Now, he also leads all tight ends in red zone targets over the last 5 weeks. And now with Devontae Adams' status very much in question after leaving with a hamstring injury, Parkinson should be the number 2 target on this offense, making him a very strong tight end 1 play against the Seahawks, who allow the 4th most PPR points to tight end. So I think Parkinson is actually a very good play this week, especially with a short turnaround. I can't see Devontae Adams playing and being ready to go for that Thursday night matchup against the Seahawks. Speaking of the Seahawks, AJ Barner only rostered in 12% of leagues. Barner didn't have a huge day, hauling in 3 of 6 for 27 yards against the Colts. The positive news, though, is he is now playing a full-time role with Elijah Arroyo out. Barner ran a route on 32 of 41 dropbacks. Barner is a viable streaming option against the Rams on Thursday Night Football. We have seen this matchup once before in Week 11, where Barner caught 10 of 11 targets for 70 yards for 17 PPR points. So I think and the other guys on your Colson Loveland's always going to be in play, but he's more of a 4 to 6 target kind of guy. A little bit less upside than Luke Musgrave. Also had a decent day for a tight end, anyways. I think you can look at him. And then Dalton Schultz, I put him on here. He's rostered like 52, 53% of leagues, a little bit over the threshold that I typically talk about. But if he is sitting out there, he's also a really good play for the Texans. So let's move over here to some questions. Rice and Kelsey are nothing now that Mahomes is done. I mean, I wouldn't go that far. Don't get me wrong. It obviously is a hit. But Gardner Minshew is a competent backup, and at least for next week, anyways, they do play the Titans, which the Titans have been thrashed by everybody through the air. Like they are really, really bad against opposing quarterbacks. They've now allowed a QB1 in 8 straight weeks. So, like, I don't think that those guys are necessarily dead. Because like I said, Gardner Minshew is a competent backup. Now, again, obviously you're not going to expect the same production that you would if it was Patrick Mahomes. But still, I don't think those guys are dead. I think both of those guys could be okay, at least for this week. Now, week 17 against the Broncos, I probably don't want any part of that. But at least for week 16, I think Rice and Kelsey can still be fine. Hall or Tracy for week 16. I haven't got that far to really get to go through it, but I mean, Tyrone Tracy looked really good today. So I think I would probably lean a little bit more towards that end in terms of him or Brees Hall. But Again, I haven't really got into my rankings or anything like that for the week. I typically do that starting on Tuesday, so probably check back here. Yeah, and I already mentioned Dalton Schultz. I think he's a pretty strong tight end option for Week 16. Evans or Rice, I probably would go Mike Evans at this point. I mean, they have obviously a lot more to play for. Baker Mayfield in a matchup against the Panthers, so I probably would lean Mike Evans, who looks really good. Had a little bit of an injury scare there at the middle of that part of that game, but Mike Evans obviously was just peppered with targets in that game, and obviously his red zone usage and stuff like that is always nice. So I would probably always lean towards Mike Evans. So that being said, I think that's the last question here. So appreciate everybody. Hope everybody had a good at least week 15. I will say this at the very least. It was there was a lot of high scoring, really good games today. I think that was at least a plus for today. I mean, Amon-Ra St. Brown had a monster day. Trey McBride had another monster day. There was a lot of scoring, at least in the quarterback department, depending on who you played. So, I mean, there was at least, that part of it that went really well today. There was a lot of really high scores for today. So, lost Devontae Adams now. Rice probably going to have a terrible game without Mahomes. I'm in pain right now. Yeah, the Devontae Adams one, it hurts. But he's been I mean, it was felt like it was only a matter of time. Devontae Adams has been kind of gutting it out with this hamstring injury. At this point where they stand, they probably need to shut him down for a little bit to get him right so he's ready to go for the playoffs. I think there's still an outside shot the Rams can miss the playoffs, but and I'm but I highly, highly doubt it. I mean, they have 11 wins at this point. I find it hard to believe that they would miss the playoffs at all. So I think at this point, you want to get him right and ready to go for the playoffs. And as far as Rice is concerned, like I already mentioned, like I think Rice will be fine at the very least for next week. So, um, like because you get the matchup against the Titans. The Titans defense is absolutely dreadful. Like I've said, they've allowed now 8 straight weeks of a top 12 quarterback performance. Again, I know it's Gardner Minshew. I'm not saying Gardner Minshew's great, but he's at least a functional backup quarterback and that can get the ball to receivers. I would expect Kelsey and Rasheed Rice are going to see a lot of targets from him. And so like it's not the worst case scenario that you possibly could be in. Does it is it a hit for Rasheed Rice? Absolutely. But I don't think that it's like the end all be all. I think Rasheed Rice will still be like probably a decent wide receiver two play next week against the Titans. Worried about starting JT this week? Yeah. I mean, it's just things haven't been the same since. What made one of the things that made JT so good was how efficient, obviously Daniel Jones was, but obviously also Daniel Jones' like ability to run the ball. I think really kind of opened things up a little bit for Jonathan Taylor. His offense just hasn't been the same since then, and also this he has been extremely game script dependent. Like in wins is when he's had his monster games, and losses he tends to get squeezed a little bit. So obviously Philip Rivers first start today obviously wasn't ideal, but they almost won that game. Yes, I don't think Jonathan Taylor is going to be that guy the rest of the last couple of weeks of the season. But I still think he's still going to be a consideration as as an RB1. He's just not going to be like a locked in top 3 running back the rest of the way. I don't think. So that being said, let's go ahead. I think I'll go ahead and wrap this up. Again, I appreciate everybody. Hope everybody had a good week. Hope everybody's moving on to week 16. And yeah, we'll be back again with we'll go live again like normal on Wednesday, and have our top defensive streamers and kicker options out on Tuesday morning. So have everybody a good rest of the week, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye.